We're
Hi.
back with Wendy and Janet, back to talk about all things neurodevelopment. And it's our field that we love, and it's all about sensory, motor, and reflex through the age of development, which is all ages, through life. And I want to introduce Wendy real quickly. She started her own neurodevelopmental practice called Sense Enabled in Seattle, Washington, a number of years ago, and we have been friends for a very long time, and we have very complementary approaches. We've learned from each other a great deal. We've worked with each other a great deal. And I'm Janet Oliver, and I work out of Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and my business is called Plan for Learning and Living. And together we make this fabulous couple. Today, we're talking about something really, really interesting that most people do not know about, and it is talking about facial reflexes, all different kinds of facial reflexes. Some are lifelong, some are primary or primitive, but how they affect emotional development, or they affect interactions, social interactions, or how they affect regulation of emotion, or even the referencing or understanding one's emotion that develops through the face. And this is not an area many people talk about, but it's extremely important, I feel. And I think it's going to be new to a lot of people who are interested in this field. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the polyvagal theory, which is the theory of Stephen Porges. It talks about a lot of different things. It's a lovely book, The Polyvagal Theory, if anyone wants to read it. If you're really interested in the vagus nerve, that is the place to go. But we're really interested in the vagus nerve because it is the largest cranial nerve in the body, and it goes all over the place. They call it the wandering nerve because it just goes into almost every part of your body. And Stephen Porges's work was talking about how one branch goes into the lower body and one branch up into the upper body. And he theorized that this development of this cranial nerve going up into the face is a lot of it's for social and emotional interaction with people, to know you're safe, to be able to signal social cues to your group or to outside groups. So there's a lot of information about that that's, I think, really interesting. So this vagus nerve theory is if that vagus nerve is not functioning very well, and I'll tell you, it's one of the things we see so often in our practices are people whose vagus nerves are not doing all they could. So it's activating them into a sympathetic state, which is a highly excitable state often. Occasionally it's the hypoactive, it's like the opposite of that, but most of the time it's like overexcited, can't be regulated. Okay, so the example we were giving is yesterday, I was working with a young man, he's about, how old he is now, about 8. And that is the age of social interaction, very much the time when people are starting to really read social cues, try to understand other people's body language, try to put together this sense of how one fits in a group, etc. Well, this young man has a terrible time with that because he is acting much, much younger. And after having worked with him for a while, I figured out that a lot of this was coming out of issues with the facial reflexes. In other words, because of early trauma, he kind of skipped over all that. And because of that, his ability to read social cues was much interfered with. Okay. And I know you've had some people like that too, Wendy. Maybe you can talk about a few things that you've seen with people who might have facial reflex issues that kind of also relate kind of to how you socialize and how sometimes it's off-putting too.
Yeah, I've got one young man who I've known since he was a baby and had a medical issue where he had an intubation tube. So he didn't get sucking, he didn't get rooting much. He's got a very high gag reflex, and it comes out, those things come out in his social interactions. He has a very, his sense of what is off-putting or disturbing or gross to other people when eating is almost non-existent. We've really had to work hard on those social skills.
Right, and part of that is we haven't developed that mirror. Like, how do we look to others? And that, well, I think a lot of that comes out of our intaking and understanding of these things, especially the facial area. Like,
I mean, when you have a preteen, right, licking their fingers after they're eating, or
which might look totally normal for a baby. Might look fine. As
an infant or a little child, licking every little bit of goodness off your fingers is expected. As a 13-year-old, not so much. It grosses the other people at the lunch table out, right? He's got a very high, excitable voice, right? So his voice is extremely high because his throat is kind of closed. Because of this medical condition, he had a lot of trauma to the vagal nerve. And I think that comes out in his social interactions. You see it in, he will kind of a mouth breather, right? He walks around with his mouth open and does the licking, and
socially, that's just not cool, It's just is not, people don't want to see it, right?
Yeah, and socially, he's probably a 9-year-old developmental stage, right? So he's more in line with a 9-year-old than he is with the tween that he really is.
But it's during that 8-9 period, really, that children start realizing those things are off-putting to others. Like, they want to fit in, and so they're willing to stop doing it or try to think about it or deal with it more. But if you have these traumas in these areas, it's a lot harder, because these are driving you. And that's what we've said. These reflexes are coming out of the lower brain. They're not conscious often. They are often filling some kind of need to the system for security or for sensory information, or they have their purposes, but usually those purposes are supposed to be integrated at a certain age, especially for social interactions, because we are mirror creatures. We see other people and we do it, like we're doing it in our minds. So if we see someone licking some, you're doing it. It's kind of disgusting.
I mean, our natural expression is to go, ooh, and raw, right?
I'm gonna gag. We have our own reflexes. Gag reflexes is one of those in the back of the throat.
That's where he has a very high gag reflex. I mean, he can look at something and gag. Certain textures in his mouth cause him to gag. Sometimes when
getting some just thoughts of something you don't like can make some people feel like they're going to gag, and that's even an expression. That makes me want to gag,
And the gagging then kicks in the drooling, right? So because you're getting ready to gag, you may get a lot of drool. Or if he's excited about something that he's thinking about eating, right? Because he's quite the gourmet. And if it's something that he's really excited about eating, then we'll start seeing drool, right? So you have to.
I think everybody's mouth starts watering. It's all how much control you have of the muscles and the lips. So let's talk a little bit about the lip reflex when we're doing that.
Right.
A lifelong reflex that everyone has is if you leave your lips very still and you touch them, you have a little bit of, we call it the snout reflex or the lip reflex. Snout sounds funny, but that's what it's technically called.
Okay.
So your lips poke out. Now we have that for if you see something really soft. Sometimes people will do that. They'll actually pucker their lips a little forward because it's like reaching out to something that is, that the lips want to touch. It's the kiss reflex, basically.
And I was just going to say, I've got a couple little ones that even in talking, I can tell that they want to give me a kiss because they'll
starting to come up to you.
Like
they're
little
eating by their lips.
Fish, right? You can see that they're thinking about it. They want to do that motion, right?
Yeah, and the opposite of that's all reflexes have a contraction and expansion phase, right? And
Right.
so the kiss part is the contraction, but the expansion is a
Yeah.
smile. A smile. But if that smile, if something's wrong there, what we don't get a smile, we get a grimace,
You
right?
get a grimace.
And
Yeah.
grimace is something you see with these kids that are like trying to smile, but it looks painful almost because these muscles and sensory area, the nerves aren't working very well.
Well, and it goes back to how do we look? They don't understand how that looks. And
Yeah.
a lot of times they'll be gritting their teeth while they do it, right? There's a lot of teeth.
especially especially if they've learned to smile by someone saying smile, and they don't have that natural muscle memory of that. They'll,
Yeah.
it gets very yeah, and that's not a natural smile, obviously, but that's what they've learned to do. So that is one of the ones that we see with that. Let's go into a little bit about licking, and that's a little later, but all children go through a phase of licking things. Okay, usually they're very young. They're very young. They're still babies when they're doing that, right? And it's often they go into toddlerhood and they're still doing it. That's why in the old days we had lollipops that kids would be encouraged to lick. They would encourage to lick with sustained hard motor. And we know from our work that sustained conscious motor pattern helps the upper brain take over the lower brain pattern. So I don't have to lick everything anymore because I've learned to control those muscles and that need through that. And we've seen many children who haven't gone through that. I have a great video of a toddler going up to a window, a glass window, licking the window.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing with toddlers. They'll do that. But we're supposed to
Yeah.
grow out of that. Like, it's supposed to get inhibited and integrated into your system. But we still might use it for, to be gross or even to be attractive. Some people use it in a, as a sexual or a very physical way. It can be
Right.
seen as that as well. So all these facial reflexes really are tied into either very, very strong emotions, I would say, strong drives in us, right? So anything to say about lick before we go on?
Well, I mean, it is one with my tween that we use. We smear something tasty like the sun nut butter, peanut butter, cream cheese onto a plate, honey, and he licks so that he can get that because he still wants to do the licking, and we have to give him an appropriate place to do it. So that's one of the activities we give to him. I give to him so that he can get that input and get that stimulus to get that up there in the upper brain
People don't
in a way
understand
that's
the tongue
appropriate.
too. The tongue, the vagus nerve goes through the back of the tongue, right? And so our next one we're going to look at is sucking, but licking, that pressure that you're putting on your tongue is stabilizing the back of the tongue where that nerve is coming through. So that's got a stabilizing effect. And sucking, that activity, again, very young, babies suck. They suck right off the bat. No one teaches them. They know I mean, they shouldn't have to teach them. If you have to teach them, there's a problem. But they should be able to do it naturally because it's a natural reflex for suck and swallow. That's part of that whole pattern of that. And that also is doing something to the tongue. When one sucks and swallows, you're actually doing a rhythmic, repeated motion that so that vagus nerve gets rocked. And that's why when babies are sucking often, they're often going off to sleep because it's actually relaxing them and helping them to organize and to.
And that's something he didn't get because he had the intubation tube and he couldn't suck. I mean, we worked to try and keep him sucking, but he had a heart condition that he just didn't have the energy to be able to suck. Right. And so that has interplayed with the vagus nerve. It's interplayed with the licking. It's interplayed with his sucking, the rooting, turning into a breast.
Well, we're going to talk about rooting in a minute. That whole that's right. I'm so glad you said that because all the facial reflexes kind of interplay, because it's a
Yeah.
small area. It's not that many muscles and nerves, and they all are doing these different patterns. So it often, one thing will change or make something else different. It's not so clear that, oh, well, they didn't suck, so this is going to happen. No, if there were other problems, the sucking may not have gotten finished, even if they were breastfed for, 2 years. It still may be a problem only because other things are going on that aren't working that well. So it isn't always just
Well,
lack of
and
opportunity.
they interplay with other reflexes outside of the facial.
They do.
Because he didn't suck, he's got a poor connection to his core. So he's got poor abdominal connections and balance issues and a high startle and a moro because he's got the trauma to the vagal nerve. So if you don't know about the oral piece of this, you look at him and go, well, he's got poor balance and he startles.
Right.
And you think that's where you start until you realize that he's had all of this oral
right
reflex.
And a lot of times that's all you need. Like I was just saying with that other student I was working with just yesterday, we've been working on those things. Those things were much better, but we're still having some strange in your face type of, overly oral type of reactions to people, exhaustion with trying to read nonverbals. Like a lot of stuff was still happening, and I realized that it all was around the vagus nerve, in the facial reflexes and the muscles, and that he could not do nonverbal communication, especially at the face. He just doesn't have that ability.
Yeah.
So that's going to affect all those things. So let's talk a little bit about rooting. Rooting is another reflex that when the baby's cheek, usually it's a nip, it's the mother's nipple originally. She rubbed the cheek of the baby, and the baby turns to take in the nipple, and it's really one of the very strong, gravity sense or vestibular functioning of that turning the head. And it's why a bottle, we always say a bottle isn't as good, because usually a mother does the bottle the same way every time, and she doesn't do this to turn the head. Like a breast, you have to turn your head. So if you do one side, then you do the other, the baby's turning their head one way and the other, and this is really strong.
Symmetry.
Yeah. So, but I worked with a person who had a certain syndrome, which was a chromosomal difference, but there was some different nerves like missing in the eye area. But I had just out of blue, I said, let's check the rooting. Oh my goodness, I have never seen a person, everything else was working pretty good. I did this and it was like, and this child was like, 4 years old, and it was like, whoa, it's the highest rooting I've ever seen. And so we worked on that, and honestly, his eye problem improved. It got better. It didn't completely get 100%, but it was a huge improvement. Just shows you how much all the motor of the face and not having hyperactive reactions in those areas can really help with lots of problems you might not think are even related. So
yeah. And you think about how much information a viewer takes in about someone else's face. There's a lot of things that you can overlook about someone's body or posture, or unless you're looking for it. But we have all we learn how to read all these micro movements in the face and to judge them and to address them and to make judgment calls about who this person is by the way they are interacting through their facial features. We don't think about what's going on underneath, right? We're looking at the surface, and
I think it's psychology instead of physiology. And often things start in physiology and go into psychology.
Right. And this physiology that we're talking about interferes with all those subtle movements and cues and things that we are expecting to see in someone's face on the surface.
Yeah, and the opposite goes. If you've never felt those, it's hard to read them in another person. You can't read them if you haven't felt them. We feel things, And we don't realize that that's part of development, but we play around with faces. Don't kids all make faces and stuff? They're doing that, and they do it in social contents too. You know, I love making faces with my kids.
In front of a mirror making faces at themselves. I mean, that's really common, right?
It's developmentally absolutely appropriate thing.
Look at everybody taking selfies of themselves, and all the time they spend trying to get the right angle so they can do a selfie. I mean, we're still doing it, right?
It's true, and I think that that's, you know, I always try to get the parents to actually have face making contests with their kids. And being from Minnesota, it's not very popular. We have a very stoic population here, and they don't like to do those kinds of things. But I really do think that to get the muscles toned, the nerves toned, and all the things done in the vagal system, as well as the other cranial nerves in the face, and there are so many, it's extremely important to work those out and not get too flaccid with it. The last ones I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about together, because we got to kind of wrap this up, is biting and chewing. Now, I did a whole thing on YouTube about biting, because biting is really a fascinating one. There's a bite reflex when you're frustrated, when you are down in that animal brain and you're in an anger or a fear situation. Biting is a weapon, and it's a way to it can be aggressive. It can be also stabilizing, because when you crunch down, you're affecting the stability of the inner ear. You're stabilizing your face and your eyes, and so it can be a real, way so it comes off as aggressive, but it can also be loving, because I just want to eat you up, take a bite.
I want you right in here.
I want to eat you, right? And that is a thing. I mean, we say it, we go, oh, that sounds really weird, but it is a human need. You've seen cats, little cats and dogs too. They'll nip you in a kind of a loving kind of way to go.
I worked in a Montessori classroom, and I had a little guy who would routinely come up and nip me in the back of the thigh.
Oh, wow.
Because I was his favorite teacher, right? But he would come up and he would hug my leg, and then he would nip me in the back of the thigh. And so, that I just love you so much.
Chewing is kind of like that too. You want to chew on something, right? And we talk about it as thinking about something, but biting is more, and chewing is more, like around it, not around completely. Some people chew like this. That's really not the chewing reflex. Chewing reflexes or forward, right? And that is also a reflex. It has to do with jaw tension. People who don't have jaws aligned correctly for lots of reasons, that can also cause problems with the inner ear, and it can often happen during anxiety, because we see people, I mean, I have so many kids. And they're eating their shirts.
They're chewing their nails, right? They're chewing their nails. They're sucking on or chewing on their clothing, right? Hair, right?
Your hair, yeah. These are all ways we see it as anxiety, and we think that's emotional. And yes, it is, but it's coming out of a physical reflexive response.
Well, it's a physical trigger. It's an environmental trigger to a bodily response, right? So
and chewing helps stabilize it.
And so this helps relieve it. And I don't know why I do this. I just started doing this.
Right. It's not thought out. There's nothing to do with that. So I think we're going to wrap this up. This was not meant to be, by the way, people go, well, what do you do about this stuff? Well, if you want to get in touch with us, our information's down below, and you can call us or email or do what you want.
Check our websites.
Check out the websites and things. We're also available to do trainings. Wendy, I didn't tell everybody, I wanted to say that at the beginning, is working on NeuroNanny, which is a wonderful new system to help caretakers of all kinds identify and know what they're seeing with unusual children's behavior, because if we knew what we were seeing, we would do better, and that's the truth.
Yeah, well, and I think part of what we're doing here with our talk is, if you don't know these things exist, then you don't know there's a cure or a mitigation or help for it. And so and people think, well, they just need to stop it. They just need to stop. And if you don't understand the underlying cause or reflex or root behind it, then it's not going to stop.
And it is mind over matter. The top brain can, through just sheer dint of will, can override the lower brain and the reflexes. The only problem with that is, as we all know, it comes out another way. You know,
Well, and
the bottom brain always wins.
it takes so much effort. If you think of it as bandwidth, that's a whole bunch of bandwidth that you could be using for things in a lot more constructive or pleasurable way than having to put all that effort into controlling something that was meant to work as it was designed.
Okay,
So,
Wendy, well, we're going to shut this off now. And our next one, we're going to talk about facial reflexes again, but this time we're going to talk about them in a more functional way, about eating and speaking and other things that we do with our, that we use. Maybe it's even swallowing, those kinds of things, a little more traditional in the way we look at these. So we'll see you soon. Bye.
bye.